It's 5:30, December 6th. I'd like to call a special personnel committee meeting to order. Dana, could you take roll, please?
Alderman Barber.
Here.
Alderman Mayor.
Present.
Alderman Holtford.
Here.
Dale Weichel.
Here.
Tom Trainer.
Here.
Richard Budney.
Here.
Frank Presko.
Here.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We don't consider these citizens, so commence elite citizen comment period. Item 3, recommendation to correct a recently identified 2021 health plan issue related to the HRA HSA.
Okay, does everybody have their full packet with them? Because I think it would be best, I know everybody's aware of the issue, but I think it would be best if we would maybe just start with that. Before I do that, I just want to identify our visitors. We have Matt Flannery from Bealo Vetter. He's an outside attorney that has been assisting the city and USI with this issue. And then as well as Ray from USI, who's our health insurance consultant. So what I want to do first is just maybe walk through, just set the stage for the issue. I know you're all familiar with it. I've been working so close and personally with it, I just don't want to take anything for granted. So back in 2020, when the city was designing its health insurance plan, take for granted. So back in 2020, when the city was designing its health insurance plan, we were coming off a couple of years where employees have been very burdened with high cost claims because of a couple changes that we made 2 years in a row to the health insurance plan. So last year we were looking for something to perhaps reduce the burden on the higher users, not necessarily overall, but on the higher users. So currently we have a high deductible HSA health savings account plan that the city contributes $750 for a single, $1,500 for a family. The addition in 2021 was to layer on a health reimbursement. What that was going to do is for the higher cost claims, employees that were spending a lot of money, we're going to get a little bit of relief on the back end. $1,250 for an individual, $2,500 for a family. So we did our plan design just like that. So for each individual, it was set up for 12. As soon as they hit the plans that we have, all the employees that are on single plans, they're all fine. There's no issue with that. However, we do have 87 employees on family plans. I'll explain the details of how each are affected in a minute, but basically on those 87 family plans, we set it up and our administrator, United Healthcare, administered it in a way that, hit $1,500, the $1,250 became available. IRS code says that can't happen until an access point of $2,800 for a family plan is hit. Therefore, people were getting money at $1,500 and they were not getting it until $2,800, which is what caused our compliance. So moving forward, we have been working on this since October 14th, many hours for all involved. There's basically 3 options, and you'll see that in the analysis on the bottom of that first page of the council action. The first one is because HRAs are $1 coverage. If we have $1 coverage, we can't. HRAs are $1 coverage. If we have $1 coverage, we can't have a qualified high deductible plan, which means our health savings accounts contributions are not valid. They can't be tax advantaged. So the first correction would be saying, hey, we have this HRA plan that we layered in. Be saying, hey, we have this HRA plan that we layered in. That makes our whole plan non-high deductible qualified. Therefore, we have to tax all the contributions. That is it's a very comprehensive solution because there's the most guidance from the IRS in that regard. Simply saying it's not tax. The issue you might say with that one is, or one of the drawbacks is, in here I say the greatest number of employees. I want to correct that because it's not just the greatest number of employees, because all employees that are on a family plan, all 87 of them, have to be addressed. I'll explain why in a minute, but it's the amount of money that would be the most disruptive and the number of months that would be taxable, which is the drawback to this solution. But again, this resolution would ensure that employees are not negatively financially affected, which is what we've been telling the committee and the employees since this came up in October. The second option would be just a little variation from the first option, and it's not quite as perfect as the other one because it's not simply saying everything's taxable. What it would say is, it would say that any HSA contributions in months where HRA dollars were paid, right, because those were $1 on that. If I had medical claims in my family and by February we hit the 1,500 and then up to the 3,000, the 2,800 that's required by the IRS to get to those HRA funds. January and February, that's how long it took me to get to the correct access point. Those are the months that I would have taxable HS. Let me say that again. HSA contributions are taxable in months where the HRA $1 coverage hit. The HRA $1 coverage hit. For that example I just gave you, that would have been just January and February. Then the problem would have been over starting in March under option 2. My pre-tax HSA contribution would now go back to tax. So this is two, you might say. Is a partial solution to option 1, which is the full solution. We did have Matt Flannery look at this as outside legal counsel. You do have an opinion letter from him in your packet. I'll let him explain that in a minute. But this resolution again, it only affects the people that have used the HRA and the problem is gone. The other part is those employees that haven't gotten any. So out of our 87 employees, 3 of them are on the family plan. 3 of them are no longer. They're not a problem. We can set those aside along with our single plans. We had 53 who received HRA funds in certain months, some for 1 month all the way up to 12 months, that need to have their HRA contributions, both the ones from the employee and the employer, taxed for the months that they were issuing it. Then we have 31 employees who have not received any HRA dollars. That means they never hit, and no persons in their family have hit $1,500 in claims. Therefore, they don't have any HRA funds, which means January through November, they're clean, you might say, and under option 2, they would not be needing to be corrected. They're still tax advantaged. We did take a proactive approach and say every one of those 31 employees in December will be affected, because we don't know what happened with claims in late November or what's going to happen in December or January, and I'll list off option 3, but what I want to tell you about option 3 is I don't think it's viable. This is not based on HRA or HSA contributions, rather it's based on claims. So the first thing we would have to do to work option 3 is to redo our entire plan design retroactively to January 1. There is a question whether the city has the authority to do that unilaterally. That's problem number 1. Problem number 2 is you could never have a resolution until all claims would be in for the year. You don't know when that would be. And then the third part, which I'm learning through all of this, is our administrator, United Healthcare, who's giving us all these reports to base our resolutions off of. We haven't gotten an accurate report yet. We're sitting here just about 2 months after the issue happened, and they would have to go back and reprocess the claim. So I think for those reasons, expensive. There would be winners and losers, meaning that some employees could do better, some employees could potentially do worse, and I just don't think it's feasible to administer. So I would definitely not recommend option 3. The difference between option 1 and 2 is you might look at option 1 as a full resolution, option 2 perhaps as a partial. Option 1 and 2 is you might look at option 1 as a full resolution, option 2 perhaps as a partial resolution. So what we would suggest in conversations with Matt, we talked about some kind of indemnification that the city would have to protect us in case if at some point in time this solution would be identified to protect us in case if at some point in time this solution would be identified by the IRS as being short of a full resolution, so that the city would look at that point. Again, trying not to negatively impact employees. We did change the plan design for 2022. That's no longer an issue. But option 3 kind of did that, but it kind of retroactive. So, hearing all of that, what is and isn't, there's other pieces to this. So we have to get these reports. We have to make sure we already know all the contributions that the city made on behalf of the employees. We need a full, complete list from United Healthcare on when all the HRA money was paid. That's what we're waiting for. So we've been through this numerous times. The report that I worked on is this. It's about 20 pages of a lot of employees and a lot of different things. We've identified a lot of issues with it. I do think final report, I think we can get it done. This Friday is the last day that we have to get it done for the payroll, because the next payroll is on December 17th. And if we don't get it done on the December 17th payroll, the one we have on December 31st is technically not a full payroll. That's one of the 2 extra ones, so we don't get handled for December 17th, which means we need to be finalized yet this week, so that we can get those processed. We have been working as staff internally for about 3 weeks now on what this looks like in our payroll system. Again, no small feat. There's about 8 adjustment codes that need to happen, that need to be created. Earnings, deductions, and employer benefit codes. We have to make sure we get the codes added, tested, and processed for all those 84 adjustments. In addition to this, depending option 1, option 2, we definitely need to have an agreement with USI dealing with specifics of what that resolution agreement is going to look like. I understand Matt's going to be taking the first kick at that for USI. USI is actually paying Matt to be part of this and be involved in this. And then the last item is we just need to make sure we establish a tax rate. I do have a pretty strong draft of that. So I'm going to turn it over to Matt and see if he has anything to add to that.
Just a couple of real quick ones. One, just a clarification, one thing that you said, Peggy, about my work and Rand, and I've had this discussion in the past too. You said I'm working, and I've had this discussion in the past too. You said I'm working with the city and USI on it. I'm talking to USI on it. I work for the city. I've worked with you guys in the past on pension issues. Kind of behind the scenes, I come in when you got some tax issues or benefit problem issues. USI has agreed to indemnify Franklin for our costs, but benefit problem issues. USI has agreed to indemnify Franklin for our costs, but my obligation is to be in this matter. So I think Peggy laid out the options fairly well. I said I could and issue an opinion letter saying that option 1, taxing all employees on all contributions for the year. I think that would be acceptable from an IRS perspective. Option 2, going and saying we're only going to tax people for the months in which they had gone over the $1,400 threshold for individual claims, at which $1,500 threshold is a defensible position on this. Could the IRS claim that they really had the money there all along? What if they'd hit the deductible? They could. Your summary plan description has language that I think is fairly helpful. It says that the money's not available. Your account is not active, is the way it's phrased, until you hit the threshold. So I would So I would argue that it's not there. But because it's defensible and not clearly okay, that's where we talked to USI and said, if we're going to take this approach, we're going to do it understanding that it would cost less money for USI on the front end, but it would also have less of our employees being taxed, although reality is not a lot. So, but it will have lower taxable income to the majority of the employees than option 1, so less disruptive for that perspective. But we could get an IRS agent coming in, hey, this wasn't active, so we need some back-end indemnification that if this is deemed to be wrong, we need indemnification up to option 1 in the event that it's a problem. And that's what we've gone back and forth on, and USI has agreed tentatively to do that. We have to write up, USI has agreed tentatively to do that. We have to write up written agreement. I'm not expecting problems. You guys have been reasonable in this, but those are the two options. I said for option 3, I understand the logic. I could come in here and tell you why I think it might work. The fact that we have to retroactively amend our health plan, which is a contract with our employees in Wisconsin, I'm just not sure that that's not pushing a little bit too far. And the cost difference on the front end and the number of employees affected is not dramatically different from options. So I candidly said it's a judgment call, but I wasn't ready to make the jump and go to the lowest level of fix on this one.
I think just to add on to what Matt said, the lowest level of fix option 3, if IRS came back and said no, option 1 is the way, it wouldn't be option 1 on top of option 3, it would be option 1 on top of option 3, it would be option 1 in addition to option 3, because they're two totally different resolutions.
Good point.
2 is a partial of 1, 3 is completely non-related, and if we had to go back and do it, back and do the whole thing. So that, we would need a lot of indemnification on that one.
I move to
before we would go. Matt, when I read your opinion, I read that options 1 and 3.
You made a motion, right? I did. Well, it has to be either seconded or not.
I'll second that just for,
Okay.
so we can proceed.
When I read your opinion, I understood it to say that option 1 and 3 assume that the plan's invalid. And option 2 is assuming that the plan is valid, but there was an error in it and we're making a correction to it. Am I right in that, or?
To some degree. Option 1 and 3 assumed that the plan was invalid for the entire year for the entire population. Option 2 is reading the language of the summary plan description to say that it was invalid, but only for the people who were affected by this for the months in which they were affected. For the other employees, people who were affected by this for the months in which they were affected. For the other employees, we would take the position that it was active because of the way it was.
So if we accept option 2, we're saying that the existing plan still is valid, except that there was an error in it.
It was
Except that there was an error in it.
It was non-compliant in practice as opposed to non-compliant in design.
Okay, all right. Part of it was an error. Part of it was an error, but the base structure of it was an error, but the base structure of it was still a valid plan.
Correct.
Okay. And in 1 and 3, we're saying that the plan is not valid.
Correct.
Okay, so then, is there any precedence? I looked a little bit on Lexis about there being any disallowance of a plan or so. And I found that IRS doesn't, like many things, IRS requires approval, like change of accounting method. They do not require any approval on a HSA.
They do not require any. There is a lack of. HRAs are just self-funded health plans with a fancy name, but the name HRA and HSAs being a code section 223 creation, they're only about, I was going to say about 10 years, probably about 20 years old now, but there's a absolute lack of guidance other than
on administrative errors, that letter guidance.
Correct.
Probably. It's great that you're able to find the error in this year before there's any tax consequences on the employees without being corrected. Therefore, if IRS was how would the government be disadvantaged? And in this case, you're making all of those corrections. Because
we're making all the corrections for the people who
for the people.
Correct. Under option 1, we would be saying we're making corrections basically for people who never benefited from an error, but we're correcting it as if the whole plan were in violation. Option 2 is we'd be taking the approach of saying anybody who exceeded the threshold, we would be correcting now, and that would be what the IRS could argue later is you should have taken everybody, why not correct everybody?
Or that the plan, because the plan, you had an existing plan and you just added, because the plan, you had an existing plan and you just added on to it this additional feature. So actually, you're saying the IRS would say that because you added on that additional feature and you made an administrative error, everything's wrong.
Yeah,
They could.
They could.
Yeah, okay, but in my opinion, that would never hold up if you took it to a, that would never.
They could.
Yeah, okay, but in my opinion, that would never hold up if you took it to appeals or litigation. IRS would be looking towards, I'm not saying an
Part of
agent,
my
an agent
judgment-
wouldn't be setting it up, like you said.
And part of my judgment is, I do a lot of audit-related defense work with the IRS. In Wisconsin, most of the payroll audits, this is a benefit issue, but still most of the payroll audits historically have been handled by, out of the Waukesha office. And so Dave Rasmussen, doing most of it, he does not do the active investigation, but I've worked with him for many years. What you describe is what he would do a lot. He would come in and make payroll assessments to my clients, and the national office would say, "No, we see your argument, but maybe this is not a test case we want to take on litigation." Those sorts of that experience and that background went into how I came to being able to sign off on option.
Right, and intent. There is no intent. So, just to summarize, not to belabor this, we're saying, I think we're safest in saying that our plan is valid. Opinion, I'm not asking you for yours, but I'm saying that we're saying that we had every right, every intention to do everything correctly. There was an administrative error, 1,500 instead of the 2,800. Once we caught that error, we corrected it.
I don't think there was any
So,
poor intent, bad intent,
No.
ill intent on anyone's part in this
Right,
case.
right.
On anyone's part in this
right,
case.
right, but if you,
It's a very technical issue.
but if you fall back and say that the plans are invalid, then I think you put yourself in a substantially weaker position. That's my input. So I go for option 2. Summarize. So I go for option 2. Summarize what I'm saying.
Is there any desire to make case law on it to firm up this? Kind of a nebulous thing out there? Would there be any reason for it?
I don't see that. Well, I don't. I don't see that. Well, I don't see any trend in that direction. The current IRS initiatives, enforcement initiatives, focus more on retirement plans, health plans, anecdotally, and that's all I can say here, and experience-wise, because there's no published guidance on it, but the technical violation of this part of the health plan rules, I've seen no movement towards. I think there is, although not legally significant, not a statutory reason for it. My experience is that when the IRS deals with government employers, they are sometimes less aggressive than they would be if this were a group of doctors who were trying to sock their HSAs for extra cash. And so,
Leaning would be towards the option 1, sense that let's correct it and move on, not have this potentially maybe bite back at some point if it were to happen. I'd much rather just clear it up, have it done with, and move forward. That's kind of what
the plan whatsoever. Is United Healthcare, are we going to have any issues with them?
So we are not going to be with United Healthcare as of January 1st. We switched over to UMR. If I could just give you a little bit of
For 2022.
For 2022, right.
But this all is with regard to 2021. If we make
Correct.
some sort of a plan change this year, addition regard to 2021, if we make
Correct.
some sort of a plan change this year, addition,
Well-
deletion, anything of that nature,
So
are they going to balk?
they actually want us to.
Okay.
Because, see, they were part of the problem too. They administered the plan wrong. See, so that's what I was going to tell you about UMR is when UMR found out, our new provider, our administrator, is who found this problem. When they were going through to set up the new plan, they said, can't do this. And so then we started going back and United Healthcare said, can't. Now, United Healthcare's solution to all of this is just do option 3. Don't worry about it at all and just have the lowest cost and the fix. And I have zero comfort with UHC.
Do we have any idea what these costs are going to cost the employees?
So it's not going to cost the employees anything. It's going to be a hassle for employees. It's going to be disruptive for them because we can talk about a little bit, depending on how what solution we want to go to. I have a draft letter that would go to employees. I told you I would bring you something before I shared it with employees, and this is my first kick at it. There's a couple things we still need to deal with that I have, especially one issue down here about funds that were already withdrawn, but employees that I have, especially one issue down here about funds that were already withdrawn, but employees. Yep, it's the one that I just handed out tonight. So basically, it kind of explains the issue, and this is going for option 2, but it would also fit for option 1. It would not fit for option 3. But so the city would handle it on the December 17th payroll check. So the liability amount for the FICA, state and federal taxes, and a gross up to get the employees to be made whole would all be handled in the December 17th check. The part that employees would have to do is, if you flip to the second page, employees would have to fill this form out. About 64 of them are at Associated. We have an agreement with Associated that negates the fees for employees on an HSA plan, it's a corporate plan, but employees are also welcome to go to any other bank. We have about 20 other employees that don't have Associated Bank, and there's about 12 other banks. People that have Associated, the 64, because they just fill out this form, we'll tell them exactly what they need to do, and then they would send that in and get their money back. And the money will not have strings anymore. If it's through the other ones, we can still work through this, and in the letter you see that I offered basically my help on whatever they need, which I would help them figure out how to do it. Disruption for them in that they have to do something, and things are getting a little bit convoluted, but we would give them enough information that when they went to do their taxes, they would have that information. When they go to take action, they have that, but they do have to take action and will be affected, just not monetarily under these up.
I just wanted to clarify UAC's position, and Department of Administration articulated it very well, but to give a little bit of clarity, they indicated right away that this has happened to them before. They have an IRS letter ruling that says that if you fix the plan, you figure this out, you retroactively amend it. Again, that is not taking into account statutory law or ordinance that applies to the cities of Franklin specifically, but that's why they're on the route to option 3. They have apparently done this before with the IRS's permission to use that formula and make it go along with the city of Franklin agrees that this is, there's winners and losers. It affects people strangely and certainly in a way that we did not set out, that was not meant in any way, shape, or form. So I wanted to clarify their position with regard to option 3, because it's not just they want to make it go away. Yes, that's really very true, but they believe that they have an IRS letter ruling that allows that solution. It's not a great one for here because of, again, the intent of the way the plan was set up was to help them. It's not a great one for here because of, again, the intent of the way the plan was set up was to help employees, not to penalize them for any HRA funds they got, health reimbursement account. I want to be very clear on that. I also, want to share with the committee that we did quite a lot of indemnification, because option 2, yes, the idea is that it is less expensive, but it's less expensive punitive to fewer employees for a lesser amount of time. So it's not saying the whole plan is no good. So we're doing the best we can, but that's why we agreed to the indemnification for the entire time the employee could be audited.
So, Matt,
Can I just make a clarification? Sure. That's all true, but what I will tell you is option 3 requires us to demand from employees that they pay the money back.
Agreed.
And that is something we are zero interested in, right? From myself to the staff to the mayor to, I'm sure, the council, that is not an option. And the second thing is their IRS letter ruling that they have is on FSAs. Just to say it's totally different, but it's a different letter. And of course, you know how the IRS writes their letters. It's only for that scenario, not a, exactly. So,
What I was going to ask is, did you see this letter with the ruling?
Yes.
And how do you interpret that?
I think both Rayanne and Peggy summarized my position on it. One, it's actually not a letter, it's an office,
Really?
chief counsel memorandum. It says it cannot be cited or relied upon as binding authority for anyone else. So that's not uncommon. We look at private letter rulings and those sorts of memos all the time that's not uncommon. We look at private letter rulings and those sorts of memos all the time for guidance, even though we can't rely on it. So it does say you can't rely on it. That's not wholly determinative to us. It's not as good as something we could rely on, but if it fit the facts, I'd be comfortable saying they've said this before, and so we take debit card excess reimbursements. It's not exactly the same scenario as here. The difference was that in their case, there was a design problem where the plan was designed to be compliant, but it was administered wrong. In our case, it was designed sort of in a hybrid. Was it designed to be compliant, or was it designed to reimburse employees? It's a gray area that's a little bit of a distinction, so I thought I'd stop there. Second, it required that the plan be retroactively amended to the first day of the year. In Wisconsin, I am a little concerned that we would have the unilateral right to do that as an employer. Third, it required that even if you're not really going to enforce it harshly, that you take it as any debt owed to the city, and that you send out at least a dunning letter saying pay us now or else. I think if we can now undermine the logic and the rationale for the IRS position of saying if you do A, B, and C, it's not an issue. It was all those reasons together that I said, I see the logic of the ruling. I see why you can get there, and that UHC has said, that they've had discussions with the IRS and they've been told. UHC has said, that they've had discussions with the IRS and they've been told informally that the same logic would apply. But I just couldn't get my arms around being close enough that I could put my name on our firm letterhead and say, go with it. My name on our firm letterhead and say, go with it.
Thank you.
Alderman Mayor?
You mentioned a minute ago that UHC has done this before and they're comfortable with moving ahead on this. Doesn't that kind of imply that they realize something's wrong and maybe should have let us know ahead of time? Or maybe should have altered their practice?
Well, I'm sharing with committee, and I'm trying to say this as eloquently as it's told to me. UHC believes that they have no liability. That plan was set up. There was an error. As soon as the error was discovered, they informed the city through us. We did, and it should have been amended. Or you take the part that was wrong, which was the HRA, and you fix it. Again, they are not a city. They are not interested in about how the employees are going to react or their family members. They don't know about unilateral courses of action. This is something they feel they can do and have done in the past. They've relied on the past. They've relied on the authority. So all I'm sharing with you is they were Peggy's commentary. They were pretty brusque in the fact that they're not going to participate in any subsidy unless there's
Just one point.
This is a clarification for you, but yep, you go ahead.
For future knowledge of whoever's making the decision at whatever point, please keep that in mind for UHC as a footnote to them when they're considered.
Absolutely. And then if we can just go really quick, this plan design language, summary plan description language on page 2 came from United Healthcare. So you see in the box, in the grid in the middle, it says that when you pay first before the HRA is active, you see the employee plus family $3,000 for an access point. That's fair. Employee plus family $3,000 for an access point. That's fair. Now go down to the bullet point 3 underneath there, the superscript. each covered member has an individual access point within the family access point. Wrong. This, don't tell me you have an access point. Wrong. This, don't tell me United Healthcare has no responsibility in this because they wrote one thing in one section and they wrote another thing in another section, and this clearly tells that, with all due respect, they don't know what they're doing.
So how are we gonna really deal with UHC then?
How are we getting off topic?
Okay, that's,
Really, I mean, because we're talking about trying to affect the plan, not dealing with the cause of the plan, which could be a different discussion.
I was gonna say, I think it'll come next when we talk about how that's gonna get paid for.
I was just gonna ask, these legal fees are gonna be covered on this issue? The IRS doesn't typically work in a really speedy thing, so 2 or 3 years down the road, they coming back and go, oh, you can't do this. How long is our legal liability gonna be covered?
Two answers to that.
Be covered?
Two answers to that. First answer is for most purposes, an IRS statute of limitations 2 years from the date that an individual files their tax return for 2021. So if they file for 2021, so if they file in early 22, mid 22, or late 22, if they've got other spousal income, business into late it, got 3 years from that date, would take us to 2025. If there's no audit, there's no ongoing fees. We don't have a rate for our fees to date, but we've been comfortable proceeding because it's only a month or so. We are going to have a written agreement for the back end indemnification on this. We went back and forth because USI initially was saying it should be a 3-year maximum, but then in talking about came back, USI would agree to indemnify the city for the difference in the cost between option 2 and option 3. We haven't talked to option 2 and option 1, excuse me. So we could talk about how much would be in that at the end of the for any fee. At the end of the for any fee, I'm comfortable. So you wouldn't incur any out of pocket from us at that point. And because I'm not going to take a dig at UHC, but because I'm not UHC, if I'm telling you today you're not going to incur a fee from us for fixing it, you're not going to incur a fee from us for fixing it.
I would prefer that we have a solid agreement sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I didn't want to write up a settlement agreement until I knew which direction we were headed with.
So just in regard to that, we would hope that whatever the committee makes a recommendation on tonight would go to council tomorrow. We would hope that whatever the committee makes a recommendation on tonight would go to council tomorrow night. As we'd have that in place, we'd very expediently to keep that in place, because we'd want that in place.
Can we talk a little bit about option 1 so I can sure that a little bit about option 1 so I can sure that correctly. Does it not affect everybody? Solution to option 1?
Everybody on the family.
Everybody in the family. It's essentially telling them they're not covered for the entire year.
Correct.
Right, so that's not covered for the entire year.
Correct.
Right, so that's awfully painful. In my mind, to look at it as a nuclear option.
What?
Any HSA contributions, employee or employer, would not be tax advantaged for the entire year. That's the benefit of having a high deductible health plan, is that those tax advantages, $80. So for the entire year, they may not. Because I read you off the 84 employees that we have and how each of them would be treated, and with the exception of the 3 that are no longer at the city and didn't use any HRA funds.
So if I'm an employee, I was taking option 1 as making the employee more whole than option 2.
No, it would probably make them more angry, because that means every dollar that HSA account had to be pulled out. Now, in all fairness, even though every dollar had to be pulled out, they now get that money without strings, and they had strings on it before. But you know how that is when you're tax planning and you're trying to set something up, and then all of a sudden someone comes and pulls the rug out from under you. That's a very, and then all of a sudden someone comes and pulls the rug out from under you. That's a very rightful frustration to have.
Well, then I'll withdraw my motion.
Alderman Mayor, your
I move to
your motion was for option two?
one,
Option two?
one,
Option one.
yes.
Is there any further?
So he withdrew, so we have to check with the second. He is for that.
Is that what you understood, option one?
What happens if I don't withdraw?
Then there has to be a vote on it. Then there has to be a vote on it.
I'll withdraw it just to see if it comes back.
Then I would move that we go with option two.
I second that.
Okay, the motion for option two from Alderman Mayor, and you have a second.
Yes.
Okay, so then the motion would be motion to approve the correction and
Utilize-
recommend number two of a recently identified issue with the city's 2021 health insurance plan related to the HRA and HSA components, and forward such recommendations on to the town council for their consideration. Did I read that correctly? Okay. Any further questions? Any further questions, comments? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
So before we finish this item, I would just like to address the question that was asked about UHC. This isn't really about UHC, but this is about how this would be, the spreadsheet with all the documents. USI has actually agreed, even though UHC has not. USI has agreed to fund all of those changes, the taxability issues, in addition to a gross up, to make sure that the employees are not negatively impacted. If they choose or choose not to go back to UHC, is that fair, Ryan?
All right. Next meeting may be December 20th, if something comes up. Can I ask a question before we, a couple months ago, we talked about the police sergeants. Where are we at with that?
So for December 20th at this time, but some things that we are working on, obviously the work plan, we finished up a lot of items on the work plan. We're still working on some. We have police negotiations going on right now. We would be in a position to give an update on that in January. The sick leave, the overall sick leave information that we've been talking about, we'll be prepared to talk about that. And that will be prepared to talk about that. And that will also include the sergeant piece.
Okay, and they're aware of all this?
Correct. So I met with Sergeant Bath and I told him, he basically gave us until April, and he just said he wanted us to, before he would ask you, the committee, to do anything new. And I just told him, would ask you, the committee, to do anything new. And I just told him what we were working on and why, and he thought it made a lot of sense. So he said he didn't want to push us at all.
All right.
And they're open. And we talked about, I think you all recall, we talked about having an employee committee. I actually asked him if he had one of the sergeants that would want that committee. I thought that would be a good fit. The accrual type sick leave that we use today, and if we were going to do something like PTO or change that sick leave policy,
Right.
we would want to make sure we have an employee committee as well talking about it. That was a request of the
Does that
Alderman Mayor, was that you? I think you might have made that request about having the employee committee,
Yes,
just to basically work with me about having the employee committee,
yes.
just to basically work with me in the background to put things together.
Does
before
that
it comes
violate
back.
any?
Nope, no, not, it would be only the non-represented, the employee committee would only be made up of
Okay,
non-represented.
okay.
So, yeah.
All right,
Before that.
I was gonna say, we will let you know by the 15th, but as of today, we don't have anything that would be pressing.
okay. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
Motion